Welcome to the Innovation Conversation, a podcast about innovators, both in business and real life. Hosted by myself, Ricardo Pascual, and Harry McDonough.
This podcast is sponsored by OpenExperts.com. OpenExperts is a place to go if you're looking to talk with top experts from around the world. That is open-experts.com. This podcast is also sponsored by startupnetworks.co.uk. Startup Networks, it's an online forum where you can find all the resources you need to run your startup. From grants to investors to tips and tricks on how to be successful in your startup. Today we are talking with Perdie and Margaret from Hotbed, one of the top accelerators in London.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Innovation Conversation. Today we are joined by Perdie and Em from Hotbed. Ladies, welcome.
Thanks for having us.
It's a pleasure having you here. Would you like to tell our audience a little bit more about Hotbed?
Definitely. So Perdie and I started Hotbed in May of 2022, and we were actually building another company at the time that we started in 2020. But through building that company, we realized there was a huge shift in the market, or a shift in demand for investors being able to access incredible founders outside of just their local area. And we heard all these conversations about how Zoom was going to unlock this pool of incredible talent, but we didn't really see that desire to transform into a meaningful impact. We didn't see a shift in the number of founders who were being funded outside of these key cities, and we kept wondering why. The majority of venture capital dollars right now goes to just 5 cities that account for 0.0004% of the entire world. And it just doesn't make sense to us. We really believe that talent is evenly distributed around the world, but opportunity and funding isn't. So that's what we're trying to impact with Hotbed. So our strategy, our business plan, I don't know why I said business plan. I mean, who even creates a business plan anymore? But our the way we work, shall we say, is quite different from a traditional accelerator. And that is very much because we don't really understand the point of trying to choose founders when they're super early stage. Everyone knows their game plan is going to change. And all of these other accelerators and even VCs are having to make decisions based off of static pitch decks, which we don't think does a good job of articulating the potential of the startup and the founder. And so the way this comes back to what we were just talking about with our larger vision is that we've launched this virtual accelerator to be able to reach founders from all across the world. And we use this kind of unique strategy of letting founders who meet our minimum requirements onto our programs that are typically between 5 to 6 weeks. Sometimes they go up to 10 or 12. And we bring on the founders to meet those requirements. Then we track their week-on-week growth in both quantitative and qualitative metrics. And then over the course of the program, the founders who progress the fastest are the ones who then proceed onto our final demo day events. And so we really, really like this strategy because we're able to assess the potential of the startup based off of things like their ability and their speed of execution, how many users they're speaking to per week, what sort of insights they're extracting from these conversations, how quickly they reuse these insights or integrate them into the product roadmap and use it for their growth plans. And it just paints a much more comprehensive vision for the founder. So right now we're going to be going on to cohort number 6 shortly. We worked with over 500 startups from over 40 different countries, and we're really just getting started. There's a lot more there, but I'll stop.
Wow, it's quite impressive stats. How hard was it to get this off the ground? Because you mentioned you both met in a different project, and then when you started this, how hard was it to get started? Because I can imagine getting into all these conversations with all these investors at the startup. It's not easy to do, right? So how did that work out?
I think it's probably better to talk about how we got our first company started off the ground because from the founders who are listening, when we started Hotbed, we'd already run a previous startup where we built a lot of the relationships which came into Hotbed. So we didn't really feel like we were starting from zero. We were already starting from a point where we had built trusted relationships with people. When we started our previous company, Spy Startups, which was in August 2020, we had nothing. We'd just been made redundant a couple of days prior with almost no notice during a pandemic. So it really wasn't an ideal time. But the way that we started was just to have a conversation with everybody that would take it at that point and really understand what they wanted. So we had open conversations with 10, 15 people in the first couple of weeks who reached out to us after we got made redundant, and just talked to them about like what their challenges were, what we might be able to help with. And then we almost built the business around that. So we didn't come in with an idea in mind of what the business was going to be. We had a conversation. We wanted to both start our own business. We've been in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, which definitely helped. But rather than have a solid idea and then pitching that to people, we just had conversations where we listened. We started seeing some common threads of things that people were saying a lot. And then we came together and formalized a business that responded to people's needs. And that's how we started. We ran that business. It's kind of still ongoing, but we ran it full time for the first 18 months. Essentially, it was a white labeling program, a product. So we would go and work with other companies on a program where they could connect with founders, but we were kind of designing and building it in the background. So it would be branded as them, but we were the people doing the work. And then through that experience, we then discovered some of these problems that MA talked about in the ecosystem, and we came up with a way that we thought that we could solve that problem. And so then that's when we had Hotbed built, and we were fortunate enough that some of those relationships that we'd built with founders in Spy Startups, the previous startup, were then relevant for Hotbed. So then we kind of evolved it from that.
Interesting. From all the startups you've had on your program so far, what are the key defining characteristics of each founder that you think, you know what, people who have these 5 traits, they are always going to be successful? Which ones are they? Because I'm always curious to know if you can tell from the get-go, like someone's going to be successful or not. So have you managed to identify them? And if so, then which ones are they?
So I would say the TLDR is absolutely not, can we tell from the get-go on who is going to be exceptional. And I think that's mirrored across the entire VC ecosystem world as well. I would say the similar characteristics, a few off the top of my head, is one, these founders are speaking with users very, very frequently. That's one of the kind of biggest indicators that we've seen that seem to be correlated with success. And I don't think I don't know whether or not that's because they're getting insights that are changing the trajectory of the company, or if it's because it's perhaps an indicator that this founder really cares about the customer and wants to empathize with the customer as much as possible. I'm not sure. And then number 2 would be, these founders tend to be much more focused when they're coming to sessions or like even meeting with Perdie and myself. Like, they don't want hour-long discussions talking about everything. A lot of time they like come in 2 to 3 questions and are, in and out, which we love. Like, they come in, they know what they want, they get it, and then they leave. Amazing. Love that. Perdie, what else do you think?
I don't really like the term hustling or hustle culture, but it is the ability to sell. It's not even necessarily the ability to sell, which is a really, really positive trait, because not only are you going to have to sell to investors, you're going to have to sell to your customers and future team members. So you have to have that like storytelling and ability to get people behind you and believe what you're building. But it's also just the fact that you're prepared to go out there and hustle a little bit. So like Emma mentioned, in our programs, we ask people for a weekly update and we ask them how many users they spoke to. And the people that don't want to speak to users and they want to kind of stay in their cocoon and guess what people want and then build it, and they're comfortable, coding or coming up with financial forecasts or basically doing the stuff which is required. But you need to also make sure you've got a customer and that customer is willing to buy. The people who are like up for having those conversations, speaking to people, learning, like Emma said, in our programs, we have people that will sit there and not say a single word necessarily throughout the whole time. And then there's people who will be very vocal and ask questions in every single session that we do. They'll be asking VCs questions. They'll be building a profile for themselves. And you can see that they're really hungry for it. And I think that is one thing that helps founders to stand out. And they're normally the people that have the better weekly updates when they send it to us, because they've spoken to people and they've learned something and they've changed something because of what they've learned. And then I think, resilience, tenacity, that kind of thing, you're going to get knocked back a lot. And you have to be able to kind of accept that that's going to happen and not let it get to you too much and keep going.
How are you guys finding the ecosystem? I think it's very hard to get started and get funding right now. Or on the contrary, there's a lot of options on the table and you can actually get funding from multiple places.
So I think it just differs based on what stage you're at. Pre-seed and seed stage companies, honestly, they're still getting funded. SEIS rounds are still getting closed. Angel investors, maybe they have less discretionary income, but they still want the tax benefits. And so I wouldn't say we've seen a noticeable slowdown in those pre-seed rounds. Seed rounds, honestly, it still seems like they're getting closed. I mean, I think the data might slightly indicate that they're slowing down a bit, but I wouldn't say for founders, like from what we've seen, there's need to be like incredibly discouraged. I would say probably budget a little bit more time to close your seed round. It might take longer. You might have to speak with more investors. They might be a bit more risk adverse, but it's certainly not all doom and gloom. Series A and past that, I've certainly heard otherwise, but we're so focused on the early stage founders, and so far they're doing okay.
Yeah, and the expectation, just keeping in mind that with all of the AI and no-code tools that are available, the expectation is that you've proved quite a lot. I think that's the difference.
Yeah,
so it's easy to raise at pre-seed. There are investors, there is capital, but if you raise with just an idea and a deck, investors are going to push back a bit and say, like, what can you prove now without taking the funding that this is going to work? And can you build a website using no code and then start building up a waiting list? Or can you build a prototype yourself? You don't need that coding expertise or loads of money to build something. So, and with ChatGPT and other AI tools, you should be able to be out there kind of as much as you possibly can before you raise.
So what advice would you give to early stage founders? Would we just build your own MVPs and local tools and then ChatGPT to fill in the blanks?
Well, number one, I'm not biased. Join Hotbed. We'll help you out. But point number two, after you've done that, I would say, I mean, it's hard without knowing like what the founder is building because there's a lot of different options out there. But honestly, you don't even have to get as sophisticated as building something on a no-code platform. We've had founders like Rachel from Courier Kids who literally built the MVP on WhatsApp. Like, you don't need anything fancy. You just need to prove the value proposition like resonates with the target user. That's it.
Interesting. How are you finding the mix between genders and people from different backgrounds, both in Hotbed and also in the market? Because there's a lot of conversations at the moment about diversity in the space and how there's a bit of a boys' club in the tech space. So how are you finding that overall?
There's a tip. So we were just talking to Ricardo before that we've started this series of 25 tips. And there was a tip that came from Sam Marchant at Hambro Perks about the difference between women founders and men founders when they're pitching investors. And the fundamental difference that he's seen from all the pitches he's seen is that men tend to talk about where they're at now and where they're going, and women talk about where they're at now and how they got there. So the women will start from a position of today and look backwards, whereas men will start from a position today and look forwards. And communicating the larger vision is what the VC investors are buying into. So they're buying into what's going to happen when they're on the journey going forwards. And so there is a lot of talk out there about women getting less funding. If you look at the Seed Legals data, women that are out there raising rounds are just as likely to close them as men. It's just that there seems to be less attention, or
they're raising less.
Yeah, they're raising less money. But some of it in part is down to how, like, I'm sure you've heard this before, the questions that VCs asking women are about risk, and the questions that VCs might ask men are about opportunity. So you kind of need to be aware of the game that's being played and switch the narrative to work in your favor. And so if you're a female founder, just think that you should be talking about opportunity, you should be talking about the future, you should be talking about vision, because that's what's going to get VCs or other investors excited. And if you're asked a question that's related to risk or is related to the past, or you feel like you're having to prove yourself, answer that question in a way that switches it to talk about the way that the man would have been asked the same question.
I would also add on that, like, there's everything right now. We see all of like the press pieces, sifted articles, LinkedIn content around like societal issues and like these macro issues. But I think it's so much more important for founders to focus on like what they can personally do, like how they answer questions and like even like their attitude going into the pitch. Like one of the things that frustrates me the most is when I hear female founders before they've even started fundraising or have even put together their deck being like, well, is it even worth me talking with investors because I just hear no females are getting funded? And like we hear that so often. And that I honestly think that narrative is like perhaps doing more harm than perhaps anything else, because people go into this, whether they don't go into it or they go into it thinking the odds are completely against me, when realistically, like there are so many incredible successful female founders like who continuously prove like this glass ceiling. I mean, there isn't one. I mean, there are absolutely systemic issues, but there's no reason why people should be hesitant or fearful about the process.
What about raising? Would you advise people to just focus on raising investors in the UK, or should they go to other markets like Europe and the US, where, well, especially in the US, the rounds tend to be a lot bigger, especially in the early stages? Where would you advise people to go? Just focus on their existing market or actually go elsewhere?
That's a really good question. I would say, I mean, it depends case by case. US, I think people tend to underestimate it a bit. They think, oh, investors are a lot more focused on opportunity. They're less risk adverse, and they're going to be able to raise larger rounds at larger valuations, when realistically, like the US already has fantastic deal flow. So sure, investors have more capital, but at the same time, like the pool of competition is phenomenal. And also investors in the US tend to prefer to invest in the US, which is something that we're trying to change, but that's a topic for a different day. And then regards to like how, Europe or how they should think about that process, like it could be helpful for founders to speak with investors here in the UK and then just like ask them if they know of any great investors in Europe that they can introduce them to. That would at least help like bridge the gap of doing cold outreach to someone in a completely different country. I would say though, to bear in mind, if you're doing a pre-seed round and you're doing SEIS, like remember that international investors don't get that benefit.
Yeah. And be a bit strategic. Like if you are going to go to the US, don't just go because you think it's a golden ticket. But if you're going to launch into the US as your next market, that is a strategic reason to take money from that country. Same if you want to launch into any other country in Europe or further afield. If you're going to go there, then raising from there makes a lot more sense than just going because you think that you can get money.
Now for a very cheap question. I know a lot of people listening to this podcast, they are founders themselves, they're just getting started. And they're having a bit of those down moments, right? Because we all have them, want to get down and stuff. So could you tell us, could you share with our audience the worst moment we had in business? Where you just say, you know what, I'm just going to quit this. I am fed up. Bring on, I don't know, because I'm a big fan of, junk food when I'm feeling sad. Bring on the milkshake and the gigantic burger, and I'm just going to, soak in my own misery here. So what was that day, and how did you fought back against it, and how did you rise above it?
So we're probably going to need to wait a little longer to share what our most recent bad day was. If we can think of a different bad day other than the obvious one, maybe we can talk about what we do during bad days.
Okay. What do you do during bad days?
Yeah. I would say number one, like have time to vent. Like if you feel really poorly, you just have to kind of honor that, not to sound wooey, but it's okay. It's okay to like go out for a walk, a really long walk, like listen to music and like just be really pissy. It happens. And I've been like so shocked by the number of times like I feel bad, and then honestly you wake up the next day and you just get into work and keep going on. Speaking with other founders is obviously really important because everyone's been in a similar situation, and also reminding myself of like the other points of potential failure for now really successful companies. Like there's this incredible story in the book from Mark Randolph, who's a co-founder of Netflix. I think it's called No Rules, where he talks about one time to subscribers, this was when they were still mailing out DVDs, they meant to mail out some like presidential debate or something like that, and they accidentally ended up mailing out videos of like pornography. And like to me, that's like probably one of the worst mistakes I've heard of. And yet they're still doing pretty well, and no one even like knows about that story. Sorry, Netflix. but like moments like that, there are countless of them, and they're probably so much worse than like what you're facing right now.
We were actually talking about this today, so it's a good time to ask this question because we had like a pretty bad day fairly recently. And we were just saying you don't really have any other choice than to pick yourself up again, right? You can like wallow in it for a day, but at some point you're going to have to make a decision to either let it destroy you or to keep going. And so that's where the resilience and the tenacity comes in. So when you make the decision to keep going, it's really surprising how only like a couple of weeks later you can look back and it doesn't seem as bad as it did the time that it was happening. And so there's loads of strategies that I've adopted, having bad days, like in previous jobs as well. And it might be like a bad interaction with a client and I feel really awful about it. And someone just said to me, how much do you think that other person is really thinking about this? Like they're not going home and spending all night worrying about it. Like they don't really care. And if it's something that you think is kind of business critical, like just remember where you've come from. If you started a business, you started from nothing. So you can do it. So it's kind of amping yourself up a bit and giving yourself a bit of a pep talk.
And how important do you think it is to be surrounded by good family and friends to help you on the entrepreneurial journey? Is that a key element, or is this something it's very nice to have it, but if not, you can still carry on with yourself?
It's a bit of a double-edged sword, I think, honestly, because it depends on who your family and friends are. And having founder friends, I think, is really important. Having friends that work in a corporate environment try and give you advice when you've had a bad day as a founder can be really, really annoying because they'll say something that's just so like unsympathetic to your situation, not necessarily intentionally, just because they genuinely don't get it. And so those people aren't necessarily helpful, but having a community of founders, I think, is. I don't know if your opinion is different.
I would say, weirdly enough, I have a few friends who have absolutely nothing to do with startups. They love me to death, but probably have absolutely no idea what Hotbed is, but they all wear Hotbed stickers like on their laptops. One of them has it on their phone. And it's so wonderful to have that total blind support, because I know at the end of the day, God forbid anything ever happens to Hotbed, they couldn't care less. They love me for me. And that is just a nice reminder, because so much of your identity is tied up in your startup. And it's nice to be reminded, hey, you're not just that, you're a lot more. But at the same time, you do want people who kind of understand it around you. I would just say, as Perdie was saying, advice is so rarely transferable. And yet people, especially people who have never been founders, love to just share it. It's the formula to success. Oh my gosh, you just need to do X, Y, and Z. And probably 99% of that advice would have killed the companies. So you have to just appreciate the intention that hey, that person's trying to help you, and then politely discard of it.
And very interesting question, but how did the name come about? Hotbed? That's an unusual name. So how did it come about?
I think through a thesaurus and random internet searching for names that was similar to incubator or something. We were toying with words that were related to ecosystem words that you would have heard before. But our previous business was called Spice Startups, and we built up a brand that was a bit more feisty than the traditional brand that you would see in the fundraising ecosystem or accelerator ecosystem. And so I think we were just reading out 1,000 different words from a thesaurus, how about this, how about this, how about this, how about this, how about this. And then we landed on Hotbed, which is a hotbed of innovation or a hotbed of talent, which you'd see in press articles and stuff. And we were that's it, because it encapsulates that you come to us for the place where all of the talented individuals are, and where the innovation is happening, and where it's all going on. And it's got the kind of incubation feeling of there's support helping them to grow as well. So it felt like a good fit in terms of what it means, and also a good fit in terms of being bold.
Interesting. If you guys have a magic wand and you can fix something or a lot of things in this ecosystem, what would that be? What would you want to fix straight away? Because you just know it's wrong and it doesn't make any sense to continue the way it is.
I mean, I think it goes back to, okay, I'll say two things, but like the first one, it really goes back to what I said at the beginning, which is like talent is evenly distributed around the world, but funding and opportunity is not. And like that's something we just kind of keep repeating because it's so mind blowing to think like how many brilliant people out there are just not being founders. They're not building incredible companies. They're probably sitting on the answers to so many of our problems, but there's just no way to find them and to fund them and give them the opportunities they need to bring their vision to life. And I think when you like really meditate on that, it almost becomes a little bit like maddening or infuriating because it's just absolutely absurd. So that's what I'd like to see changed, hopefully from us. And then point number two, I would say mindset. Founders are so often like, not even just founders, everyone I think is like the own worst enemy. And the narrative that you have on repeat to yourself is what ends up becoming your reality. So if you go into fundraising with the mentality of, I'll go back to the gender bit, like I'm a female founder, I'm not going to get funded. Every time an investor says no to you, you're going to think, oh, it's because I'm a female, versus the men who are also pitching hundreds of founders. And maybe one of them is just thinking like, okay, it's a numbers game. I'm trying to get to the 5 investors out of 300 that are going to back me. This one said no. On to the next one means I'm one closer to find an investor. Like your self-narrative is absolutely everything. But so many people are on autopilot and it's just like programmed for them and haven't realized like that's a massive tool that's sitting in your brain that's completely under your control.
I'll say another two. So I think in the ecosystem, there is a lot of noise, but not necessarily a lot of value. And managing to navigate through the noise to get to the value, I think is sometimes quite difficult for founders. So as an example, if you go on LinkedIn, there's a lot of people talking about a lot of stuff for their own like PR, but they're actually not providing any value. And you need to find the people that are. And I think the other thing is, from an investor perspective, and I understand why investors do this, but like not enough clarity on the decision making, which can end up wasting founders' time. So if it's a no, tell somebody it's a no, and explain why, rather than having, I think, and it kind of links into this thing where investors are seen as like better than founders, and founders have to like bow down to the investors, and that dynamic in the relationship, I don't think it should be like that. It's fairly obvious why it is like that, because there's people with money and people that want money. But I think investors could help change that by just being a bit more transparent about whether they're interested or not, and to save people from like constantly going after them when they know that it's a no, but they're not prepared to say it's a no, because founders are going to keep chasing the money if they think the money's there.
What mantra do you have on the back of your mind? I think mantra might be a strong word, but what's that quote or the mantra or that little sentence you keep on having on the back of your mind that guides you through like the really, really rough days, to those days you just want to do? What's that one thing that keeps on repeating itself, saying, I know, maybe I got this, or no, they're not going to screw me over, or I'm stronger than them? What's out there?
Do you have one?
I wouldn't say, that's such a wonderful question. I wouldn't say
it's a very complex question. Okay, I got it.
No, I love it. Yeah, I don't have one thing that I repeat. It's very much like an evolving conversation. I would just say, like, personally, my spirituality is really like the foundation of, I don't know, I guess like how I get through the day, and it gives me so much peace. And just remember, like, you're one very, very small bit of the universe, and so these little like ups and downs, which seem absolutely devastating and are so easy to kind of get like wrapped into, I mean, I firmly believe there's like a plan for everyone, and so I just remind myself, like Perdie and I she said this earlier, it was like, you know, you just have to like surf the wave, and that's very true. Of course, sometimes you want to like, you know, co-create. You don't want to just surf the wave, you want to like shape the wave too. So it's a bit of a dance, shall we say?
I think for me, I tell myself, and I really truly believe this, even on the worst day, like the worst business day you can possibly have, this is still better than the alternative.
Yeah.
Like if you think about everything that you might want, you might be like, do you know what? I'm just going to quit and go work at Starbucks because I can't really be dealing with the stress, and I want to finish my job at the end of the day and then like not take the job home with me and just come home and be totally present with everyone else. And then you really, really like play that through in your mind, and you'll be like, I don't want that. I'd be bored as hell if I was just working at Starbucks. And so you want to be doing this. And if you don't want to be doing what you're doing, have a really serious conversation with yourself about that, because you have to be so committed if you're going to build a business. But even on the worst day, it's better than the alternative.
Yeah.
What was the best success story you had so far?
So there's a founder. This is going to be so unbiased because we also invested in him. His name's Ron. He's the founder of a company called Sare, and he actually went through one of our programs with Spice right in the early days of his company. And then when we went through Hotbed, he went through one of our programs again. Was one of the top performers. Proceeded on to demo day, one demo day, and he closed his round. He's now raising a larger round, and yeah, we were fortunate to invest in his company in the earlier round. And he was recently on, I think, the Forbes 100 startups of India, some incredibly impressive list. And I mean, the company is doing phenomenally well, but also for Ron, just like as an individual, he is so wonderful. He came into one of our cohorts and spoke with the founders, and I think it's like one of our most watched YouTube videos because he's so brilliant and articulate, but it's also like very warm and kind. And I think even though he's far along right now, he's still just getting started, and we're so excited to see where he's going to be in 5 years.
What advice for these people when they approach investors? What's that one thing you say? Actually, don't do this. Do this instead. Is there any magical trick you can do to just have engaging conversations with investors, or not really? It's just a matter of blasting them all with emails and seeing who replies.
I think if I had to give one piece of advice, it would be remember. Well, two things. Firstly, remember that the investor is a human. And so actually don't go in and pitch them at all, have a conversation with them and let them do a bit of the talking and find out what they're interested in, and then find the right angle to talk to them, rather than just go in and be like, they'll respond to this, blah, 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 blah. And the second thing is have some empathy outside of them being human with their situation, because a lot of founders will say, I'm pitching investors because I want money. Why do you want money? Because I want to build my business. Okay, if you went to the pub and just walked up to a random stranger and said, can I have £100? They'll be like, why am I going to give you £100? And as soon as you get into the mindset of why is that person going to give me the money? It's because they get something out of it. Then the empathy for the other person kind of shows. And that's, I think, when you can pitch a more compelling argument. It's like, how am I going to make you loads of money, rather than how am I going to benefit from you giving me this money?
It's a completely different approach, I think, because, like I said, a lot of people just going asking for money, right? And they never think, what does this person needs to have in order to give me money, right? It's very valid. I know we're very short on time, which is a shame, because there's tons of things we can talk about. But if people want to reach out to you, how can they do so?
Yeah, so go over to hotbed.co. There's an email list you can sign up to be notified about our upcoming events and our upcoming programs. Our most recent event, we just had the co-founder of WeWork, who was our headline speaker amongst an incredible lineup of speakers. So our events, I'm totally biased, but they are pretty wonderful. I would also check out our LinkedIn, our Twitter. Maybe we can link it in the show notes. I don't know if that's an expression podcasters just say, or if it's real. I hope it's real and we can link it. But yeah, I hope, and then our YouTube channel. We're trying to build our subscribers, so we'd really love anyone who subscribes. 100%. Like and subscribe. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Perdie, Em, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All the best for us.
Thank you so much.
This podcast is sponsored by openexperts.com. Open Experts is a place to go if you're looking to talk with top experts from around the world. That is open-experts.com. This podcast is also sponsored by startupnetworks.co.uk. Startup Networks, it's an online forum where you can find all the resources you need to run your startup, from grants to investors to tips and tricks on how to be successful in your startup.